Ever feel like your credit score holds all the cards? Like it's this mysterious force dictating whether you can snag that dream apartment or if you're stuck watching your loan interest rates go through the roof.
It's true, though. A lot of people feel mystified by credit scores.
Right. It's time to take back control.
I completely agree.
We're diving deep into all the things that affect your credit score, and we're using this source, Reasons Why Your Credit Score Drops, to guide us. So get ready to decode the system and make it work for you.
It's amazing how much control we actually have when we understand the mechanics, you know?
Absolutely.
Like imagine if you knew the secret handshake of the financial world. That's what we're aiming for.
I love that analogy. No more secret handshakes. Let's get into it.
Let's do it.
Our source really dives right into the thick of it, talking about payment history as this major factor. They say it makes up 35% of your FICO score, which is a huge chunk. Why does it carry so much weight?
Well, put yourself in the lender's shoes for a second. You're essentially taking a bet on someone's ability to pay you back, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Would you rather base that bet on their hopes and dreams or, a solid track record of paying bills on time?
The track record, for sure.
Yeah.
It's like the financial equivalent of a character reference.
Exactly. A consistent payment history, it really speaks volumes about your reliability. And that's where this whole idea of automatic payments comes in, which the source talks about a lot. Think of it as like building this positive financial habit without even having to think about it.
It's true. It's like that set it and forget it mentality, but for your finances, right?
Yes.
Is there a risk, though, of becoming a little too hands-off?
Oh, absolutely. That's a great point. Automatic payments, they're only as good as the budget behind them.
Oh, that's such a good point.
It's like so vital to make sure that you actually have the money to cover those payments when they're automatically deducted. Otherwise, you're not really solving a problem, You're just automating a potential problem.
That's so smart. So things like budgeting apps that you can actually sync with automatic payments, that could be a game changer, right? Okay, so the source also dives into this other idea of something called application frenzy, which honestly sounds a little intense. What is that all about?
Okay, so picture this. Imagine you're a lender and someone comes to you asking for a loan, but then they immediately run off to like 5 other lenders with that exact same request. What would you think?
I mean, that's kind of shady.
Right. It'd be a little bit suspicious.
Like, what are they hiding,
Exactly. So that's essentially what we're talking about here with application frenzy. Each time you apply for credit, it creates something called a hard inquiry on your report.
Gotcha.
And too many of those inquiries in a short amount of time, it can make you look, frankly, a bit desperate to lenders, like you're just, grabbing at straws.
That makes sense. They might see it as risky.
Exactly. Risky. So how many credit applications is too many? Is there like a magic number?
Right.
There's no hard and fast rule, but the source mentions that those hard inquiries, they typically hang around on your credit report for 2 years.
Okay.
But here's the good news. Most of those fancy scoring models out there, they can actually tell the difference between like you legitimately shopping around for a good rate on something like a mortgage,
right,
and someone who's just on this crazy credit application spree.
Okay, that is reassuring. So things like rate shopping for a mortgage or a car loan, all within a pretty short time frame.
It makes sense.
Yeah. It's not going to throw up any huge red flags.
Exactly. Lenders, they expect you to do your homework for those big financial decisions. Credit cards, on the other hand, each application can potentially cause a dip in your score.
So maybe resist the urge to apply for every single credit card offer that shows up in your mailbox.
Wise advice. It's always best to kind of check out the card's requirements first and see if you even pre-qualify before you hit that apply button.
That's such good advice.
And that kind of ties into this other factor the source mentions, the age of your accounts.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't play as big of a role as payment history, but it's still a factor.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And this leads to a question that had always kind of bugged me. Why does closing a paid-off credit card potentially hurt your score? Shouldn't less debt equal a better score?
It does seem a little counterintuitive, right?
Okay.
But we'll unravel that mystery a little later when we get to this whole world of credit utilization.
Now, onto this whole credit utilization thing. It's one of those credit score factors that I always find myself kind of scratching my head about.
Yeah, it's definitely a common point of confusion. A lot of folks think that just avoiding credit altogether is the ticket to a perfect score.
Right.
But it's not so much about, shunning credit altogether. It's more about understanding how to use it strategically, responsibly.
So it's not necessarily about how much debt I have. It's about how much of my available credit I'm using.
You got it.
That's interesting. So why is that so important to those lenders?
Okay, so think of it this way. Imagine like a scale.
Okay.
On one side, you've got your total credit limit across all of your cards. That's all your available credit. On the other side is your outstanding balance, so the amount that you actually owe at that moment.
Right.
Credit utilization is basically just the relationship between these two things.
Okay, so I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. So if my balance is really close to my credit limit, that means the scales are kind of tipping towards a higher utilization rate.
Exactly.
And lenders aren't too keen on that.
No, not really, because a high credit utilization ratio, what that tells the lender is that you might be relying pretty heavily on credit to, just manage your everyday finances.
I see.
It raises some questions about your ability to handle even more debt, or if, surprise expenses pop up.
Right, like unexpected things.
Exactly.
Okay, so then a lower utilization rate, that's like a green light, right? Like, hey, we're managing things responsibly over here.
Exactly. It shows that you're financially stable and there's, a lower risk of you potentially defaulting on your payments.
That makes sense. So let's circle back to this whole closing a paid-off card thing that we kind of touched on earlier. How does that play into this credit utilization thing?
Great question. So remember that whole scale analogy we were talking about?
Yes.
When you close a credit card, even if it has a zero balance, you're essentially taking away some of the weight from that available credit side of the scale.
So even though I'm not using the credit on that card, just having it open, it's still contributing to that overall credit limit.
Exactly.
Which then helps keep that utilization rate lower.
You got it. So closing a paid-off card can actually make your credit utilization ratio shoot up, especially if you've got balances on other cards.
Wow. Okay, that's a big aha moment for me. So holding on to those older cards, as long as they're not hitting me with annual fees or anything,
right,
that can actually be a really good move for my credit score in the long run.
It really can. It seems kind of counterintuitive.
It really does.
But it can be beneficial.
This is why I love doing these deep dives. We debunk so many things. So the source also mentions something about requesting credit limit increases.
Yeah.
How does that factor into all of this?
Okay, so asking for a higher credit limit can be a really smart move. But
there's a but.
There's always a but when it comes to credit, right? But you have to be strategic about it.
Okay.
First of all, no guarantees. Lenders, they look at a bunch of things before they say yes. Your payment history, that utilization rate we keep talking about, your overall financial health.
So I shouldn't go on a credit limit increase spree and just hope for the best.
Probably not the best strategy. And the other thing is, if they say no, that can actually ding your credit score a little bit.
Oh, right, because then that's a hard inquiry, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So yeah, timing is everything. Strategy.
It's like a game of chess, right? We got to be smart about our moves.
I love that.
If we want a good outcome. Okay, now let's talk about something that can throw a wrench in even the most carefully planned credit strategy.
Uh-oh, what's that?
Credit limit reductions.
Yeah, that can be really frustrating, especially if you feel like you've been doing everything by the book, right?
Right. It's like you're cruising along, paying your bills on time, keeping those balances nice and low, and then bam, your credit limit gets slashed.
It's like a punch to the gut.
It really is.
Yeah.
So why would a lender even do that? Does it mean I did something wrong?
Not necessarily. There are a few reasons why this might happen. Sometimes, lenders as a whole, they get a little more strict about who they're willing to lend money to.
Oh, interesting.
Maybe the economy's a little shaky or they just change their own internal policies.
Gotcha.
Other times, it could be something specific on your credit report, like a late payment on a different account.
Okay.
Or maybe your overall credit utilization just went up suddenly.
So it might not even be personal.
Right.
But it can still feel like a personal attack.
Oh, absolutely. And the worst part is, those credit limit reductions, they can really mess with that credit utilization ratio that we just talked about. Let's go back to our scale for a sec.
Okay, back to the scale. I feel like I'm getting really good at this analogy.
You're a pro. So imagine this, right? The available credit side of your scale, it just shrinks. It's like someone snuck in and swapped it out for a smaller one.
Oh, no.
Even if your balance stays the same, your credit utilization ratio is going to go up.
It's like the weight of what I owe suddenly feels heavier because the counterbalance isn't there as much anymore.
Exactly. It just goes to show why it's so important to try and keep those balances low no matter what.
Like a safety net almost.
Exactly.
The lower my balances are, the less of a big deal it is if a credit limit changes.
Exactly.
So what can I even do if this happens? Is it just a lost cause?
No, not at all. Like we always say, knowledge is power.
Love that.
The first thing to do is figure out why they lowered your limit. Give the lender a call and ask about it. You never know. It could be an easy fix, maybe just a misunderstanding.
So communication is key, even if it's about something that's kind of a bummer.
Exactly. And if one lender reduces your limit, hey, shop around a bit. See if someone else can give you better terms.
It's like finding a new dance partner when the music stops on one dance floor.
Yes. Exactly.
Love it. Okay, so we've covered a ton about this whole credit utilization thing. Anything else we should keep in mind?
Just one last thought. This isn't like a one-time thing,
Right.
Maintaining a healthy credit utilization rate, it's an ongoing thing. It takes consistent effort and just being mindful of your spending habits. But the good news is it's totally worth it.
Yes.
Better credit score, lower interest rates, more financial freedom. What's not to love?
I love that. Speaking of things that require vigilance, being very mindful, careful attention. Let's talk about the big one, that dreaded I word.
Identity theft.
You got it.
Ugh. Yeah, that's a big one.
All right, so we're back and ready to kind of shift gears a bit. We've talked a lot about what not to do, those credit score pitfalls, right?
It's like playing defense.
Yeah, exactly. But now let's talk about how to be proactive. How do we build that really awesome credit score that makes lenders practically throw money at us?
That's the dream.
Right?
It's like we're done playing defense, now we're going on the offense.
Love it. Okay, so how do we start laying those credit boosting bricks?
Well, it all comes back to those fundamental things we've been talking about all this time, right?
Yeah.
It's not really about any magic tricks or shortcuts. It's about consistently making good choices with our credit.
Music to my ears. I'm all about keeping it simple. So break it down for us.
Okay, so let's start with the MVP, right? The one that really makes or breaks your credit score. Payment history.
Our star player, 35% of our FICO score.
Exactly. We
Yeah.
can't afford to bench this player. So automatic payments, calendar reminders, whatever it takes, we don't want to miss those due dates.
Couldn't agree more. But let's be real, life happens.
It does.
What happens if we have a little, human error moment and we do miss a payment? Is it all downhill from there?
Not at all. The important thing is to act quickly.
Okay.
Reach out to the lender, explain what's going on, and just make arrangements to catch up as quickly as possible.
Communication is key, right? Don't just hope it goes away.
Exactly. I mean, most creditors, they get it, especially if you've been good about paying on time in the past. They're usually willing to work with you.
It's about building that relationship, showing them they can trust us.
Exactly.
Okay, good to know. So what about credit utilization? We talked a lot about why it matters, but how do we actually make it better?
So it's a balancing act, right? We want to keep that credit utilization low, but we also don't want to completely swear off using credit cards altogether.
So it's not about cutting them up, living that cash-only life.
No. Actually, using credit cards responsibly can really help you build a good credit history.
That's good to hear. So how do we maintain that sweet spot?
The key is to be smart about how we manage our debt. If you have a bunch of credit cards with balances, a good strategy is to pick the one with the highest interest rate and put most of your effort into paying that one down first while still making at least the minimum payments on your other cards.
Oh, that's a good strategy. Like a domino effect, right? Knock down the biggest one first.
Exactly. And as you chip away at that debt, your credit utilization rate's going to get better, which means your credit score is going to improve.
To the positive feedback loop of good credit.
Exactly. And speaking of good habits, remember we talked about those older credit card accounts?
Right. Don't close them.
Exactly. Because even though they seem like they're just sitting there, those older accounts are adding to the length of your credit history, which lenders really like to see.
Wow. So they're like those veterans you mentioned earlier.
Yes.
Still working behind the scenes, even though they're not the star player anymore.
I like that.
Okay, so much good info. We talked about so much. We covered the ins and outs of credit scores, those proactive strategies for building a good credit profile. So as we wrap up, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this whole deep dive?
At the end of the day, knowledge is power, especially when it comes to something as important as our credit. When we understand the rules of the game, we make better decisions.
Absolutely.
And that puts us in the driver's seat of our financial future. It's not about quick fixes or anything like that. It's about building good habits and being consistent.
So well said. And on that note, we've come to the end of our credit score deep dive. Armed with all this knowledge, go forth and conquer that world of credit.